...2008 was a fantastic year for video game lovers all around the world, and it felt like not a month went by without one or more brilliant titles dropping onto our PCs and consoles. Critics were wowed by Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 4, which was not only the best game of that year, but remains, at the time of writing, the third best ever made. Players were also treated to the likes of LittleBigPlanet, a game which allowed them to become the game designer, as well as the outstanding showings of BioShock, Fallout 3, Smash Bros Brawl, and many, many more. Sadly, without the bad, we can't possibly hope to appreciate the good. And so we're back again to remind you of the most awful games, this time from the year 2008. The rules remain the same as for our previous Worst Games Of lists. A title must have received at least 7 professional reviews in order to qualify, and where one aggregator has different scores for the same game, we've taken the lower one. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 worst games of 2008. Number 10. Women's Volleyball Championship, PS2, 32%. By 2008, the 7th generation of consoles was in full swing, and so it's not surprising that PS2 titles started getting the cold shoulder. Still, there were a decent number of games for the 6th gen machine that achieved good review scores in 2008, so sadly for Women's Volleyball Championship, we're not going to cut it any slack just because it was developed for an older device. The first thing that jumped out at critics was just how laughably bad the visuals in the game were. Considering just how nice some of the graphics on other late PS2 games had been, the horrible-looking character models on display in Women's Volleyball Championship were unforgivable. Technically speaking, the game worked as intended, but unfortunately, it seems like developer Spike had nothing but poor intentions. The controls did what they were supposed to, but were overly complex. The actual gameplay was quite stiff and offered little to players beyond just passing the ball back and forth, and despite the game boasting a tournament mode, the whole thing felt like the same match repeated over and over again, like some horrendously pixelated version of Groundhog Day. Still, at least it came without the risk of getting sand in your bum, though on reflection that might actually be more pleasant. Number 9. Best of Tests DS, 32%. Let's face it, if you name your video game Best of Tests, it really doesn't matter how good it is, because nobody is going to want to play a game whose title evokes horrible memories of secondary school. As it happens, Best of Tests was neither well named, nor was it a good game, so even if its moniker didn't put people off, critics' reactions to it sure would have. In the mid to late 2000s, it was quite trendy for developers to create edutainment puzzle games that aimed to keep players' brains in shape. And there were some titles, such as Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training, that were both fun and educational. And clearly the people behind Best of Tests caught wind of this idea and decided they'd have a go themselves, though they weren't exactly successful in the execution. The game itself offered a bunch of different modes, all of which aimed to boost the player's IQ, though at no point did it actually give an IQ score, so it was impossible for players to know whether they'd gotten smarter or not. The main complaint about Best of Tests, however, was how insultingly simple many of the questions were. I mean, I don't consider myself to be Einstein, but I feel like most people wouldn't struggle with if 13 minus A equals 12, what is A? Or maybe I am a genius, I don't know. Number 8. Toy Shop, DS, 31%. When you're a kid, one of the greatest joys in life is getting to go to the toy store, as not only does it mean you might get to take home an item you've long dreamed of, but you also get to mentally take note of all the things to put on your letter to Santa. Toy Shop for the DS, on the other hand, is approximately as entertaining as working in retail on Black Friday, only without any of the fights that, might spice it up a bit. When Mel and Mark's grandfather passes away, he leaves them his toy shop in his will, with the stipulation that they must make it successful within 3 years, or it will be donated to the city. Gee, thanks, Gramps. The game was clearly aiming to capitalise on the success of titles like Harvest Moon, and whilst, yes, Harvest Moon did task players with monotonous labour, the crucial part of the recipe that Toy Shop missed out was the fun. Toy Shop was technically fine, but it didn't have much to offer gameplay-wise beyond making toys and then trying to sell them, which is okay for about 15 minutes, but once the initial novelty wore off, players quickly lost interest. Number 7. Iron Man PC, 30.57%. When it was released in 2008, Iron Man the movie was applauded by critics the world over, who praised it for everything from its story and special effects to Robert Downey Jr.'s performance as the titular hero. Sadly, it seems like whatever magic was sprinkled over the film ran out when it came to the video game tie-in, which was poorly received on all platforms, though the PC version got most of the flack. Aside from the game's overall lack of challenge, critics were upset with Iron Man's story, which deviated from the film almost entirely. This wouldn't necessarily be a problem on its own, however, the game's plot ended up missing out a great deal of the character-defining moments from the film that helped audiences to understand how Iron Man came to be, as well as the ones that got them to actually like Tony Stark. The narrative was a universal problem across all platforms, but what made the PC version stand out for all the wrong reasons were the horrible graphics, which were in no way optimized. So not only did PC players end up with not a great title, but it didn't even look very nice. Someone called Jarvis, I think Mr. Stark is in dire need of some help. Number 6. Vampire Rain Altered Species, PS3, 30%. Don't be fooled by that subtitle. Vampire Rain Altered Species isn't a sequel to 2007's Vampire Rain, but is a port of the Xbox 360 title. The original wasn't very good, though owing to all of the other cack on display that year, it did manage to miss out on a spot on our worst games of 2007 list. Not to worry though, because not only did the port not fix any of the problems from the original game, it somehow made things worse. Oh dear. The game was obviously trying really hard to be Metal Gear Solid with vampires, but it failed at the main thing that it needed to nail: stealth. In most stealth titles, players can complete objectives in a whole manner of ways, but with Vampire Rain, they were forced down a linear path. This might not have been so bad if the stealth was optional, however, the Nightwalkers had clearly been scoffing down canned spinach, so if combat was initiated, they could kill the player in 1 or 2 hits. On top of this, the story was rubbish, the acting was poor, and the graphics looked like they'd come from the PS2, leaving players with a game that completely sucked, and not in the way they were hoping for. Do you get it? That's the vampire joke there. That's a good one. I like that.
Watch us now.
Number 5. Game Party 2, Wii, 29%. You'll have to give me a moment here, I'm getting a horrible sense of deja vu. Oh wait, no, I'm not going mad. It is the case that Midway Games basically released the same terrible title twice and had the audacity to call one of them a sequel. Of course, I kid when I say that Game Party 2 is identical to its predecessor, which we covered in a previous worst of list. After all, where Game Party 1 only had 7 rubbish minigames, Game Party 2 had 11 rubbish minigames. Admittedly, 6 of them were in the original, but let's not focus on that. Owing to all of these similarities, there's not an awful lot we can say about Game Party 2 that we didn't already say about Game Party 1 in that other list. Despite being badged differently, the minigames all played the same, the graphics weren't up to much, and it just wasn't fun all round. In fairness to Game Party 2, it did have a character creator, something its predecessor lacked, which is probably the thing that earned it 4% extra on its review average. But this wasn't enough to make it a good game, and we can't help but feel like if we'd turned up to a gathering with it, we'd have found ourselves uninvited from any future soirees. Number 4. The Incredible Maze, Wii, 27.43%. Do you remember those maze games that came with a ball bearing inside them, and the idea was to tilt and rotate it in order to guide the ball to its destination? Well, if you do, you'll probably remember that such toys offered about 10 minutes of entertainment before they became tedious. And we can only assume that the developers of The Incredible Maze underwent some sort of procedure that made them forget just how boring such puzzles can quickly become. The aim of the game is the same as its physical counterpart, though rather than tilting a real toy, players used the Wiimote to move the maze on screen. Sadly, the Wiimote was a bit of an unpredictable beast, so the ball would often go flying in whatever direction it felt like. There was also support for the Wii Balance Board, but that didn't even work as well as the Wiimote, on account of the fact that an entire human body can't manipulate a controller in the same way that, a pair of hands can. Admittedly, The Incredible Maze was a budget title, so no one was expecting greatness, but no matter how you spin it, there were countless more interesting things you could have spent a $5 on. Number 3, Jumper, Griffin's Story, Xbox 360, 26.75%. For once, we have an example of a game that lives up to the expectations set by the movie it's based on. But before you go letting off any fireworks, it's worth remembering that 2008's Jumper wasn't very good, achieving a dismal average of 35 out of 100 on Metacritic and just 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. Ouch. Whereas the film focuses on Hayden Christensen's character, David, the game opts to spotlight Jamie Bell's character, Griffin. But although the title would imply it tells his story, this isn't really true, as the whole thing relies on the player having seen the movie. We could have forgiven the suboptimal plot though if the gameplay had been enjoyable. However, Jumper Griffin's story more or less boiled down to fighting wave after wave of almost identical enemies by mashing all of the buttons on the controller. Not only that, but the game suffered from horrible camera controls, plus some fairly wonky visuals that make Griffin look like Neil Buchanan. One reviewer even went as far as to suggest that any delivery trucks with shipments of the game should be directed to New Mexico, implying the game was on par with E.T. the Extraterrestrial in terms of how cruddy it was and how much it deserved to be buried in the desert. Oh, double ouch. Number 2, Homie Rollerz, DS, 23%. No, this is not a game where you go rollerblading while Marge Simpson says affectionate things to you.
Oh, Homie Rollerz.
Yes, for those unfamiliar with homies, they were a bunch of small plastic collectible figurines that were popular with youths in the late 90s. Yes, that's right, the late 90s. Around a decade later, Homie Rollerz was unleashed upon Nintendo DS owners, and it's fair to say that it was quite underwhelming. In fact, if it hadn't been for 2007's Deal or No Deal, Homie Rollerz would be the worst reviewed Nintendo DS game of all time. As the name might suggest, Homie Rollerz is a racing game of the kart persuasion, so no one was expecting anything groundbreaking. However, it seemed like the game didn't even manage to get the basics right. There was a plethora of complaints about the game, but one that seemed to crop up from most critics was the fact that Homie Rollerz was horrendously difficult. This was down to the fact that AI characters could take corners more sharply, never seemed to hit any obstacles, and were faster than the player character. It didn't help that the cars were almost impossible to control, the textures were hideously bland, so it was difficult to determine track from obstacle, and the draw distance was laughably short. Still, let me think of a positive. At least it's not as bad as Deal or No Deal. That's the best I got. And number 1, Spogs Racing, Wii, 18%. Fun fact, not only is Spogs Racing the worst reviewed game of 2008, but it's also the worst reviewed Nintendo Wii game of all time. So congratulations on both counts. For anyone wondering, a spog is basically a large tyre with a pog-like disc in the middle to represent the player. The idea was to race the spogs around different tracks and crash into other spogs in order to steal parts for upgrades. Though this crash and grab mechanic did receive some praise from critics for its innovation, the remainder of the game was lambasted by anyone unfortunate enough to come into contact with it. Chief among the complaints were the ugly graphics, complete with sparse environments, and a nice layer of fog to cover up the short draw distance. The AI didn't fare much better, as it was far too obvious that racers at the front of the pack were being punished, while those at the back were being rewarded with boosts. Now, admittedly, this is something that a lot of racing games do, but Spogs did it so blatantly that the entire race felt pretty much pointless until the last few hundred yards. So well done, Spogs Racing. May your abhorrence ever remind us that no matter how cool our ideas are, they are nothing without proper execution, which is coincidentally the punishment we recommend for this game. Editor, you know what to do.